So now we come to the actual Peloponnesian War itself, and in this video I will simply very quickly run through the three major phases of the war as defined to us by the historian Thucydides, even though he did not actually complete his full history of the 30 years. It's not, for the purpose of this course, important to know all of the ins and outs of the war itself, which are quite extensive and often get quite complicated and hard to follow. But I will provide you a quick overview here, and then in the next videos I will highlight those particular events that are important to understand with the plays. We will also, of course, be doing separate videos on the plays themselves, and so on those occasions we can go back and talk more about the war in detail, where it's appropriate for understanding the context of the plays. So okay, for right now, let me just run through what these three phases are. As we talked about at the end of the last video, the war actually got started because of a dispute between Thebes and Plataea up in Boeotia that resulted in an invasion by the Thebans against the Plataeans that effectively started the war, because the 30 years peace required that no Spartan ally could attack an Athenian ally, or vice versa. That was obviously violated in this incident, and therefore the war now got underway with the violation of the peace, since the Spartans had already declared war back a year before in 432 BC. So the strategy that Pericles established for the Athenians was that the Athenians would withdraw all of their citizens out of the countryside of Attica into the city of Athens and keep them there temporarily until the war had concluded. Pericles was aware that he had quite abundant resources by this point stored up on the Athenian Acropolis, so he believed that he had enough money stored in the Acropolis to keep the war effort going for quite a long time, to finance it. He even had a separate supply of emergency money put aside that was not to be touched even by law, interestingly, on pain of death, unless a special measure was put aside. So should the Athenians have ever needed that emergency money, it was available for them. So he thought it was all financed properly. And what he told the Athenians to do was not to commit to a direct battle with the Spartans or Thebans on land, but instead to sail around the Peloponnesus and tried to reduce the Spartans and their allies at sea by attacking various harbors in different places. So Pericles thought that essentially by just wearing down the Spartans that way, that he would force the Spartans' hand to finally give up on the war effort. The Spartans had the strategy of invading Athens every year in Attica. They could not actually get into Athens because of all those walls, which I'm sure now they were really greatly resenting after the incident with Themistocles almost 50 years before this. But they were able to torch the countryside around Athens in Attica, essentially a scorched earth policy. They destroyed quite a lot of what was out in the countryside, especially, I'm sorry to say, the vineyards and olive trees that had taken so long to cultivate. Many of those were now destroyed in this effort. However, the Athenians still had enough resources coming in from their allies and from overseas trade to keep themselves going, if not very comfortably, at least adequately from the standpoint of the war. This was really one of the main benefits that they enjoyed by having those walls surrounding the Piraeus harbor and keeping it safe from invasion from outside. All right, well, those were the two strategies. They were both failures in retrospect, especially the Athenian one, because Pericles was relying too much on a quick, easy result in the war. And he forgot to take into account the siege up at Potidaea, that Corinthian colony that was in a tangle with the Athenians about gold mine rights, and finally ended up revolting. It took 3 expensive years of besieging Potidaea to finally get them reduced. And it may have been a kind of Pyrrhic victory, because all the money that got spent there was no longer available for the Athenian war effort in general. And so the Athenians discovered that they, in fact, had a financial shortfall in trying to finance the war. And the Spartans did not, in fact, give up all that easily. And to make it worse, a plague broke out in the city of Athens also. which was made worse by having all those people congregated together in a very small, crammed area inside the city of Athens itself. So a whole bunch of things went wrong for Athens very quickly at the beginning of the war, and to top it all off, Pericles died in the war, in the plague. And as a result, he was no longer available to run Athens and keep his policy on track. So the Athenians really found themselves in the middle of a war that they really didn't know how to handle very well. And in time, that would prove quite costly. So again, just a quick run through of what's happened. And then, as I say, we'll cover phases of the war during our videos that talk about the plays specifically. The Archidamian War, named after King Archidamus of Sparta, went from 431 to 421 BC. It was an indecisive period of the war with a lot of battles going on in different places that ultimately ended up leading to no clear result. As we just mentioned, Pericles died in that plague. It was in 429 BC. His successor is somebody that you're going to become very familiar with in Aristophanes' comedies, a fellow by the name of Cleon, whom you will hear me refer to, as you see in your translation of Aristophanes' Wasps, as ruff, ruff. Cleon has a name that is very similar to dog in Greek. And apparently Cleon the politician, when he spoke to the assembly in Athens, tended to bark like a dog. He was apparently quite a terrifying figure and a fiery one when he got up on stage in front of the Athenian assembly at the rostrum. And he had very aggressive policies in mind, much more so than those of his predecessor Pericles, whose policies he probably disdained quite adamantly. Cleon, among other things, wanted to see the Athenians take on the land champions of Sparta and Thebes directly. And in neither case did that work out well, as we will see in later days. But Cleon is especially vilified in the surviving play Wasps, among our list. He also comes for battle in an earlier play called Knights that we are not reading in this course, but which definitely features Cleon in a very uncomplimentary way. Thucydides also has very little good to say about Cleon, considering him seemingly to be a political upstart who just simply lacked the foresight and judgment really to carry out Athenian policies properly, just thinking that all he had to do was just go out there and be aggressive and he would just win. And that obviously turned out not to be the case. So Cleon had some very aggressive policies for the Athenians in this first phase, the Archidamian War. There was a revolt at the island of Mytilene, the island of Lesbos and the city of Mytilene that had a faction come in from a nearby city, Methymna, that was their enemy. Methymna was on the Spartan side, Mytilene was on the Athenian side. The result of the revolt was that the entire island defected out of the Athenian League. Cleon ran the campaign to get it back in, and then actually wanted the entire city of Lesbos to be destroyed, the entire population. It was only on retroactive thought that the Athenians changed their mind and actually was able to reverse that policy just in time for the city to be saved. But had Cleon had his way, the entire population of the lesbians would have been totally wiped out as a consequence of the Athenian decree against them as punishment for their rebellion. So that's the kind of person Cleon was. Further things went wrong for the Athenians. After that, Corcyra. The prisoners from Corinth went back to Corcyra and actually started a civil war. They were instrumental in causing factionalization to occur. And in the civil war that followed, the entire city was pretty much destroyed, with even family members going at each other, different factions, an oligarchic faction and a democratic faction. That took Corcyra out of the war effectively. They were no longer able to function as an ally of the Athenians. The loss of that ally would have grave consequences later, because the Athenians did actually get involved in Sicily to their west, and they no longer had the Corcyrians to help as they had planned on. So that didn't go well either. And Demosthenes, their general, the following year tried to do inner land campaigns at night to try to separate some Spartan allies up in northern Greece, and that didn't work well either, and he actually almost got killed in some of those campaigns, so that was not so good. But then the Athenians had a break, at least a temporary break. The Spartans actually saw their territory of Messenia taken over by the Athenians by chance, the following year in 425 BC. And in that campaign that followed, the Spartans tried to defend it, and several of them actually were captured on an island nearby the city of Pylos. So as a result of that success, which by the way Cleon was responsible for in kind of a weird way, as a result of that, the Spartans ended up having prisoners taken to Athens. And that same year, we have a new general on the block, Nicias, from Athens. Nicias led some ships around to the southeast corner of the Peloponnesus, to the island called Kythera, and took it over. So the Spartans had these two problems. So the Athenians all of a sudden had some successes. Now things are beginning to go their way. However, the Spartans had a general named Brasidas. I'll give you his name. And Brasidas went up north while all this was going on and managed to persuade quite a few Athenian allies to rebel against the Athenians. And then Brasidas made a movement over to the city of Amphipolis at the very top of your map. This was an old gold mining colony of the Athenians, and Brasidas managed to take possession of it, even though the general Thucydides was supposed to protect it. Brasidas tricked Thucydides away from the city, then went over to it and got it to surrender itself. As a result, the Athenians sent Thucydides into exile for 20 years. That's why Thucydides had time to write his history. But now the Athenians lost Amphipolis. So Cleon got so angry about this that he first tried to attack the nearby city of Megara, the one that had defected. That failed. And then he attacked Boeotia, and that had a disastrous result. The Thebans knew their territory very well, and they misdirected the Athenians to go to a city called Delium on the coast, and there was an ambush there which destroyed an entire Athenian army. So the Athenians were starting to get better, and then it really plunged in 424 BC. That loss at Delium was the worst land disaster the Athenians ever suffered. So we have a whole bunch of things going wrong for both sides. So now, in 423 BC, which is the first year that's relevant for a comedy, the Athenians and the Spartans called a ceasefire for 1 year. It was in this year that Aristophanes produced Clouds. And that play, you'll notice, is distinctively non-political and not related to the war in this period when there's nothing to write about because the war was actually not happening. Following year 422 BC, when Wasps is produced, Cleon, Rough, took an army up to Amphipolis to try to recapture it from the Spartans, but Brasidas was there waiting, and when Cleon was trying to maneuver around the city to get in position, he got his army out of alignment, and Brasidas struck at the right moment. Cleon died in battle, but Brasidas did as well. But the result of the loss of these two generals, these two warmongers, was that both cities had no more heart for the war, and so 421 BC, the two cities called for peace. So Aristophanes had one last chance to satirize Cleon in Wasps, and now in peace, 421 BC, he celebrates the peace that's about to happen, the one that's negotiated by Nicias, 421 BC. So it looked like everything had ended the war, and in fact, the Athenians and the Spartans even renewed their old alliance from back in the Persian war days. Everything looks great. So the Athenians insisted that they get Amphipolis back, and also a city called Panactum, a fort that they lost near Delium when that disaster happened. And the Spartans wanted their prisoners back and that island Kythera back. The outcome of all that, however, was it all got messed up because when the Athenians tried to get Amphipolis back from the Spartans appear to have, in good faith, tried to restore it to them. The Amphipolitans refused to surrender, and the Athenians thought the Spartans had put them up to it. So there was a breakdown in relations right away in this peace. And when the Athenians tried to get Panactum back, which the Spartans had the Thebans return, it turned out that the fort had been destroyed by the Thebans. They were all too happy to give it back. So the Athenians teamed up with some other cities, Argos, Mantinea, and Elis, all of which had grudges against the Spartans on other matters. And the four of them together made a coalition against the Spartans to punish them. This is supposed to be in peacetime. And the coalition almost worked, but in 418 BC, in a huge, massive battle right outside of Mantinea, which got started because of an attack the Spartans made against Argos, the big coalition was once again, just like at Delium, tried to maneuver around to get ready to face off against the Spartans, and once again there was some kind of a problem involving the two armies coming against each other, and they missed each other, and the Athenians got into confusion, and the Spartans turned, counterattacked, and actually beat them. That was a gigantic history-changing battle, Mantinea, 418 BC, because had the Spartans been beaten then, the Athenians would have been probably in command at that point of Greece. But didn't happen. So the Athenians were just worked up into an additional frenzy, and it kept on going. The Athenians tried everything else that they could to punish the Spartans, but they got stuck in a political stalemate because their two leaders in Athens ended up at loggerheads as to exactly what to do. One was Nicias, the conservative, and the other was a very progressive sort of dandy type named Alcibiades. Now, the following year, 416 BC, the Athenians actually found out that at the island of Melos, one of those islands that didn't join the Delian League, was actually secretly helping the Spartans. So the Athenians attacked it and besieged it for a year or so. And in 415 BC, the Melians surrendered, and the Athenians ended up taking possession of it and destroying it. Now, the following year, the Melian siege is referred to in birds by Aristophanes in 414 BC. At that same time, the Athenians were also involved in a huge expedition out in Sicily. They were trying to, in fact, take over that whole island. And that failed the following year, and the Athenian fleet out there was actually destroyed in 413 BC. In that period, the Argives, trying to punish the Spartans for their previous misbehavior, told the Athenians to attack harbors all around the Peloponnesus in order to force the Spartans back into the war. For a while, the Athenians held off from doing that, but finally in 414 BC they did it, and as a result, the war got back underway again. The peace of Nicias was broken. And now we go into what's called the Decelean period, and the Decelean period involved the Spartans occupying a city called Decelia right outside of Athens. And that happened in the period when the Athenians got distracted with the Sicilian campaign that was actually failing. And then subsequent to that loss, when the Athenians heard about it, they tried to investigate their democracy to see if something had gone wrong with it to allow that disaster to happen. And there was a big coup that took over the Athenian democracy in an oligarchy. Right about in that period is when the Spartans took advantage of the distraction to grab Decelia. So that's why this war is referred to as that. The coup at Athens, 411 BC, is echoed in Aristophanes' play Lysistrata, the one that she sees the women taking over the city of Athens in order to force the men, their husbands, to make peace instead of prolonging the war effort. All right, so now the Athenians suffer through this coup. They eventually get back out of it. They get their democracy back. And that's because the revolutionary leaders could not prosecute the war properly, and there are some losses that basically induced the Athenian population to drive them out of office. Now, the one main reason why the Sicilian campaign went wrong was that Alcibiades, the one who actually called for the Sicilian campaign to happen in the first place, was caught up in a religious crime at Athens. The accusation put against him was that he had induced a crime right on the day that the Sicilian fleet was supposed to go out, that all of the statues of Hermes in front of all the houses were all vandalized. They were ithyphallic. And so whack, whack, whack. And so Alcibiades got fingered in that. And he was sent out on the campaign, and then he was illegally tried in absentia and convicted to death without any defense. So that's what made Alcibiades turn over to the Spartan side, and he informed the Spartans of the Sicilian campaign, and that act of treason is what brought about the Spartans' aid to the Sicilians, and ultimately the downfall of the Athenian Sicilian campaign. Now, Alcibiades was eventually recalled, however, because he ended up turning back over to the Athenian side when he couldn't help the Spartans as he promised them. So when he got back on the Athenian side, the Athenians recalled him after he helped them win some very important battles. However, then he lost the battle, and he went back out in exile again. So now, the big to-do over Alcibiades forms one of the main themes of Aristophanes' final play that we're reading in the class, called Frogs. in which Aristophanes tries to persuade the Athenians desperately to change their ways if they do not want to end up suffering a major fate, including maybe bringing Alcibiades back in, despite of all of his problems, because in fact he was the best general that they could have had. It does not work out. The Athenians do not listen to him, and they end up suffering a catastrophic defeat the following year, 405 BC. The following summer, right after the production of frogs, and the following year, 404 BC, is when they end up surrendering. So just to summarize all of that, Archidamian War is the initial phase when the Athenians and the Spartans are trying to follow their policies, both of which turned out to be ineffectual. After indecisive actions on both sides, we have the Peace of Nicaeas, which is supposed to patch and mend broken fences, but which ends up in fact doing the opposite. After further difficulties on both sides, the two cities go back into war again. And the Thessalian War, 414 to 404 BC, is a brief resurgence of fortune for the Athenians, and then eventually a tragic fall. And Aristophanes' plays track us all the way through that. So in our next videos, I'm going to run very quickly in summary form the relevant events for each of these portions of the Peloponnesian War as related to the comic plays. And then further videos, we'll talk about the plays in more detail, and we'll relate them, the content of the plays, to the appropriate historical events. Okay, we will see you very shortly in the next video.